Hey everyone. Shoot, hold on. I'm trying to get my there we go. I wanted to mute my YouTube. I wanted to have my YouTube up and I wanted to mute it. This is Josh Hitchens. He's an author and he wrote a Dahmer play and starred in it, right? You were Dahmer in the play?
Yes. Yeah, it's a one-person show. Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So he works for, which I thought was really cool because I live in Philadelphia. He does like the haunted tours in Philadelphia, and he wrote two books about that. One is Haunted History of Philadelphia, and the other one is Haunted History of Delaware. And I'm just gonna put his website in chat because I tried to share the Amazon link and it was too long, I believe. So there's a bit of an echo. I don't know why. Let me know if it's still there. Hey, Judy. Hey, Buttercup. Hey, Jen. So, Josh, where is your, what do you think is the most haunted place in Philadelphia? Like, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's lots of really, really terrific candidates for that. Philadelphia is a city, obviously because of all of its history, has tons and tons of ghost stories as well. But I think I have to go with the popular opinion that Eastern State Penitentiary, I would say, is the most haunted place. With all the history and all that happened there and the abandonment of it. It's just it's a fascinating and really, really creepy place. And I actually years ago worked there as a tour guide for about 6 months. And like there's just a feeling there that like you feel like you're never alone. Yeah, spooky feeling. And like there would be times when like I would hear men's voices talking in parts of the prison that are closed off and not accessible.
I would love that.
Yeah. So yeah, it was very, very, very wonderful but unsettling place to work. And if you've never been, you should definitely visit because it's an amazing.
I've never been in there, but I used to live in Fairmount, so I used to like walk by it all the time, but I've never actually been inside, but I definitely do have to check it out. But I would love that because I love paranormal stuff. Like I'll be getting the little apps on your phone where you can like talk to ghosts, even though they're probably fake, but I just do it for fun. And I probably watch like every ghost story show, like Ghost Hunters, and I even play ghost video games. Like I love Phasmophobia. We play Phasmophobia, and
I've heard good things about that. Yeah.
Oh, it's so much fun. Like it's scary, but it's fun. It's a fun game. So my daughter every year convinced me to go, but I'm too scared. Yeah, I like the scary stuff. So they have. Oh, hold on. B. Tim said, Josh, do you think the haunting is more like a tape recording of events, like an after image, or more like there is a ghost?
That's a great question. And I think it can be both. Like there's a sort of two major different schools of thought about ghosts, what ghosts are and the kinds of them. And the first is what you mentioned, like a tape recording playing, which is called a residual haunting, which is just something that like you're seeing on a loop over and over again. But then there's what's also called an intelligent haunting, where a spirit like knows where it is and is in and interacts with the environment and with people. So there, I think both of those happen. Just depends on the place. Great question.
So you definitely believe in ghosts, then?
I do. I actually grew up in a haunted house.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you've had like paranormal experiences in your house? Is that what got you like into this? Like, is that, or was this just like a random? Like your job, was it like a random thing, or were you like into it and wanted to do it?
Yeah, I was always from when I was very, very, very young was into like scary stories. Like I read like Alvin Schwartz, like In a Dark, Dark Room, and the scary stories to tell in the dark. I loved watching Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon when it was
Oh,
first
I love
on.
that show.
I still love it today. So, and when I was 8, my grandparents took me on my first ghost tour, which was in Colonial Williamsburg, which I think is still the creepiest ghost tour I've ever been on. And I was just like, this is what I want to do when I grow up, and I'm getting to do it, which is lovely. But yeah, and as far as like the stuff in my house goes, like it wasn't anything like dramatic or anything like that. It was just like, sensing like someone's watching. I would see like shadow figures usually on the staircase. But like that was pretty much it. Got
I
used to
used
it
to have
after a
I used
time.
to have vivid dreams when I was a kid, and I
Mm,
would swear that like I mean, like when you'd be like awake, like your eyes are open but you're sleeping and you can like see the room and things are like I used to have dreams like that where like my eyes would open, I would be awake, but I would see things moving in the closet and like it would freak me out so bad. But I think it
mm,
was just vivid dreams. But like this one time, it was during the day, and I had gotten bit by a spider when I was like maybe like 3 or 4, and my neck swelled and I had a stiff neck and I was throwing up. It was a nightmare. And um I saw this like giant tarantula just like drop down from the ceiling in my face, and I was screaming, and my parents didn't know what was going on because I was awake. Like my eyes were
mm.
open, and I was just like, "That's a giant spider,"
Oh my
And
god.
there was this like 7-Eleven big gulp cup on the table next to the bed, and in my dream, the cup fell over and this spider crawled out of it. And I was screaming, "It's in the cup! It's in the cup!" But when I woke up, it was there, but it was standing straight up. And at some time, like I swore my house was haunted for a little bit because I used to
Mm,
have these like crazy dreams where I would see stuff and I didn't know what was happening. I mean, for all I know, it could have been haunted, but I
mm.
think I'm going to say it was dreams.
Yeah. That would
So
terrify me. I hate spiders.
yeah, I do too. I've gotten a little better, but I still have like a terrible fear of spiders. I mean, that just totally like ruined me because it was probably the most sick like I've ever been. They thought I had spinal meningitis. That's how bad it was. So
Wow. Mm.
careful with spiders, guys. Some bites are serious. But so um what is like do you have like a ghost story from your book that's not too long that you can tell us about that we can get a little sneak
Yeah,
peek?
I'll tell something I can talk a little bit about briefly. So Washington Square is in Old City, Philadelphia. It's sort of diagonal from Independence Hall. It's a very, very beautiful, beautiful park. It's existed there since the founding of Philadelphia as an open space. But what a lot of people don't know about Washington Square is there's actually a cemetery. There are approximately 5,000 people buried in Washington Square in unmarked graves. All those graves are
Wow.
still there today. Um, and about
Now, is that
2,000.
from like the war? Like, was it?
Yeah, so it was used as a graveyard, sort of as a potter's field, for people who couldn't afford to bury their loved ones anywhere else.
Oh, okay.
But there were about 2,000 soldiers from the American Revolution that are buried there, as well as many victims of the yellow fever epidemic of 1793, and they were buried in mass graves. That epidemic killed 5,000 people in 3.5 months in Philly. It was
Wow.
sort of the epidemic, one of the big epidemics in our history as a country. But there was a lot of grave robbing that happened in Washington Square
Like they dig up
because
people's graves?
they would and sell them to doctors and medical students so they could do
Oh,
research and anatomy. And the police didn't do anything about it because they were being paid off, bribed by the doctors and medical students to keep quiet. So it kind of fell to ordinary citizens to try and do something about this. One of them was an elderly woman named Leah, and she was a real person. Like there's documentation of people who knew her, but she was described by one person as a half crazed, specter looking elderly maiden lady, tall and
oh
thin,
my goodness.
which is a great description, right?
Yeah.
And she would patrol Washington Square at night, protecting people's graves, kind of driving away the people who tried to dig them up. And she eventually died in her sleep in Washington Square, was buried there. And ever since, people who go to Washington Square at night have seen the ghost of Leah, this old woman wearing a long black dress, a cloak with a hood over her head. And when she doesn't look at you, but sometimes when she does sort of turn to look at you, she has no face. And then she disappears. So that's a
So she
little
protected the graves while she was alive, right?
Mm-hmm,
Like when she was alive, she would. Okay, wow.
And she's still doing it now. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do they have any creepy Manioc ones? Do you have any creepy stories from Manioc?
Not that I know of, unfortunately, but I'll look into that for you.
Roxborough.
I'm sure
that's
there
where
are.
I grew up. So we always, my uncle would always try and scare us with this like Hookman story, because on Hearts, it stems from, there was this young girl back in, I think it was like the early 70s, maybe late 60s. She was at like a movie with her friends or something like that, and she was waiting to catch the bus to go home. And this guy, his name was Elmo. I believe he was actually from Bridgeport, which is where I live now. And he killed her, and like, well, she was still alive actually when he dumped her, but he like murdered her, like tried to murder her, and she was still alive, and he dumped her on Hearts Lane. And then it just evolved into this story like prom night, and this guy and this girl got killed by Hookman, and they were hanging from the trees, and their ring was scraping the top of the car, which never really happened, but there was some truth to it. So my uncle would always take us down on Hearts Lane and try and scare me. I think her name was Marianne Mitchell. That was the girl's name. And the guy who killed her was Elmo something. If anyone wants to look up that case, I talked about it before in a local ghost story thing I did, but it's an interesting case. But yeah, that definitely had me spooked when I was a kid. But I can't think of anything that I've ever heard in like Manioc. Most of the stuff was in the actual city of Philadelphia, where I've heard of hauntings. And another time, did you ever go to that hotel in Ocean City? There's this hotel in Ocean City where they supposedly have this like haunted floor where this woman was in.
Yeah.
I forget how she died, but they have like a whole book and a painting of her, and you can go in and read about it. If you're ever in Ocean City, New Jersey, guys, you got to check out this hotel. And me and my cousin went there one night and snuck up to the floor that you aren't really supposed to go up there. I think they just do like tours up there, but we snuck up there, and it scared the crap out of me. But I was younger. I was, now I'm more into this stuff. I'd probably be all about it. Like I was telling him when we were backstage, Penhurst Asylum, which was like they had an asylum for people with mental illnesses. They would send them there way back in the day, and they closed it down because there was a lot of like unethical things going on. And now they do like Halloween events there, and they're having this event where you can pay like $99 a ticket, and you can sleep overnight there, and they give you ghost hunting equipment. I don't know what kind of ghost hunting equipment, but it sounds so cool. And you get to stay there all night and ghost hunt. And I've been trying to convince Dave to go, but he hasn't been down to do it yet. Elmo Patrick Sonnier. Hold on. I'll tell you his name real quick. I can tell you. There's a book about it too called Murdered Innocence. Elmo Smith, his name was, and the girl's name was Marianne Mitchell. If you guys want to check that out. Josh, have you ever dealt with non-human hauntings, or were they all human?
That's a great question. So I actually, a couple of years ago, I wrote an autobiographical play called Ghost Stories, where I talked about the various sort of paranormal things I've experienced throughout my lifetime. And one of the things I talk about, I won't go too into it here, but when I was in high school, my sister and a friend of mine experimented with a Ouija board, as I'm sure a lot of people have over time, and it actually worked. But we realized, like, as we were talking, it said that we were talking to demons, and that there were 7 of them, and that they would be here forever. And for the next 7 years or so, I would see these like dark, vaguely human shapes, and just this feeling of like malevolence from them. And gradually over the years, I would see less of them, then like 2 of them, then 1, and then they were gone. But it was a full 7 years that was kind of with me, which is why when I do the ghost tour in Philadelphia, we do lots of tours for like school kids, and some of them will say like, oh, we're going to go home, play with the Ouija board. And I literally like stop in the sidewalk and I'm like, do not do that, because you don't know what you're talking to,
Boards scare the crap out of me. Like I'm so afraid I'm gonna open some portal to demons or something. I never. They used to do that in high school. Like the kids at like the sleepover parties always wanted to do Ouija board. And I'm like, nah, I'm not doing it. Yeah, that always freaked me out. Texas Bluebonnet wants to know if you have any good Delaware ghost stories.
Oh yeah, there's so many. And check out my book if you want to know all of them. I mean, they're not all in the book, because just like Philadelphia, there's so many you can't fit it into one. But one of my favorite Delaware ghost stories is actually I call it the Legend of Fiddler's Bridge. And it's kind of near Wilmington. But during the 19th century, during the time of slavery, there was an enslaved man who some say was named Jacob, and he played the fiddle, and played this beautiful music, was an incredible musician, and the man who owned him hated this music, and he beat Jacob so badly that Jacob was unconscious for days. And when he woke up, he never spoke again. All he would do was play his music, and he left the house where he was enslaved and sort of started living in the woods on this bridge near Scott's Run, which is now like completely covered over by a modern highway. It's not accessible anymore. And Jacob eventually died and was found at that location. And then a couple weeks later, friends of his went back to the bridge, threw a silver coin into the water below, sort of as a tribute to their friend. And after they did that, they heard the sound of the fiddle music playing. And the story goes that, when that site was still there, that if you went there at around midnight, as these stories go, and threw a coin into the water, you'd hear the music.
You hear the fiddle? Oh, how cool is that? Yeah. Guys, I shared his website in the chat. It's just www.joshhitchens.com, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and all his books are on there. They're on Amazon too. I tried to share the Amazon link, but it was like super long and didn't fit, so I just put his website there. So if you guys are interested in his books, you can go to his website. So let's change to Texas said that her relatives were the Springers. She's related to the Springers. They're from Delaware, so I guess it's a popular name there. Said gotta pay the fiddle man. Somebody asked, what's your thoughts on exorcisms?
I mean, like I think, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like I think it's very, very fascinating that it is still an official rite of the Catholic Church, although very rarely done. But I think you can see it, as a lot of films have gone into. Like I think you can see it, 2 ways. That either, it is this spiritual rite that is casting out an unclean spirit from a person, from a human's body. But you can also see it from the psychological angle too, where if someone is experiencing mental illness, that doing this can help them process through it. So yeah, I think it can work both ways.
So we'll switch to Dahmer a little bit. He wrote a play and starred in a play about Dahmer.
Mm-hmm.
What's the title of that again?
It's called The Confession of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Okay.
And there's a Facebook page for it. It was originally called Jeffrey Dahmer, Guilty but Insane, and on Dahmer's Wikipedia page, the play is listed as that. I actually just recently found out that my play is on his Wikipedia page.
I found it. Well, I found you fact checking Dahmer's the Dahmer Netflix thing on Facebook, and then after I'd already contacted you and I was looking up Dahmer stuff, I was like, oh hey, his things on the Wikipedia page, the actual Jeffrey Dahmer Wikipedia page, you can find the picture or the
poster,
the poster for the play, which is super cool. I'm trying to pull up. What's the Facebook page so I can share the link? Confessions of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh, that's a great question. Let me look and find out what it's actually called. 1 second.
I found it before.
Yeah, it's facebook.com/DahmerPlay is the link for it. Yeah.
Facebook.com/. So what got you in Dahmer? Like what
for me, an important thing for me in working on this play, and I worked on the writing of it for about a decade. I started it when I was in college, when I was in my early 20s. I'm 37 now. But it was very important to me from the beginning. My goal with it was to get as close to the truth of these events as it is possible for us to know, and as it is possible to communicate through the medium of a theatrical one-person show. So about 90%, I would say 90% of the play is actually Jeff Dahmer's own words, taken from his confession, from interviews he did, and other documents. There's nothing in the play that is made up or fictionalized. Everything that I depict in the play actually did happen. And I surprisingly, I'm not a huge serial killer buff. I mean, there are a couple that that are interesting to me, but I don't get too into it. But Dahmer was always interesting to me because I felt that in a lot of ways he was kind of unique among serial killers, and I identified a lot with his childhood and adolescence before he killed people. I don't identify with that. But for instance, I myself, I grew up in a very small, very rural, conservative community, where it was not okay to be gay, as I am. So the struggles with knowing this about yourself, but having to hide that part of yourself, feeling the shame of it. Living in a place like that, I identified a lot with that. And for me, the reason why I wanted to tell the story of Jeff Dahmer and of what he did is not to glorify him or sensationalize it or revel in the literal gory details. For me, this story, I think, it's a call for social justice in a way, because there were so many times where, even before he killed anyone, that if, because he was an alcoholic by the time he was 15.
Oh, yeah, 15,
was deeply troubled. And there were so many times where if an adult, a parent, a teacher actually reached out to him and tried to help him, 17 people would still be alive. And once he started murdering people, there are so many instances of the police nearly catching him, including after he killed his first victim. And
like the one guy that got out of the house and was walking around naked, and the women, that blew my mind that they let him bring him back home with him.
Yeah, and and so it's about when we see people, and it happens all the time. Like, we see people and we know, like, in our daily lives, and we know that there's something wrong. We know they're in pain, and we don't do anything about it. We don't ask them, if, are you okay? Do you need help?
I think it's good
And
to know like red flags too, like
mhm, mhm,
you like I wanted to do a show. Well, I want to still. I haven't yet, but I want to do one on Columbine, but I'm afraid it's not going to be well received just because like everything, all the school shootings that are going on. But when you actually look into the Columbine story and all the evidence, there were so many red flags, and
uh-huh,
things could have been, um, you know, it could have been avoided if people
yes,
saw the red flags. And I feel like it's just a good learning experience. So I'm going to do a show on Columbine eventually, but I've just been
mhm,
putting it off because I'm afraid it'll upset people.
yeah. And for me, like, the telling the story of Dahmer is also about telling the story of, this is what happens when you have people in power who are racist and or homophobic, because that's a piece of this too.
Yeah. Oh
You
yeah,
know,
for
yeah.
sure. So
But yeah, for me,
BTN,
it's really about, it's a vehicle to talk about larger things,
larger thing.
and
Yep.
to try and prevent someone like him from happening again. That's
I
really
agree.
why I wanted to tell the story for me.
So B Tim asked, do you think Dahmer's sexual confusion was the main reason he became a killer due to the lack of education and acceptance at the time?
That's a really great question. And that was something that Jeff himself addressed and talked about a lot. Like, because there were so many people that assumed that, like, oh, you were molested when you were a kid, and that's what made you the way you are. And he's like, no, like,
I
this
think it
is
was
how I was
part of
born.
it was the
You know?
surgery too. The surgery
Yeah,
that he had. I did a
yeah,
lot of research on like uh so a lot of serial killers, they from either being abused or like a tumor or different things, they'll have damage to their prefrontal cortex somehow, and the prefrontal cortex controls decision making. And there's actually this woman who did a lot of studies on serial killers' brains and found out that pretty much almost like the majority of serial killers killed because they either had like a tumor or they were abused really bad as a kid and their brain never developed right, or some kind of damage to their brain. And I think that, when he was 4, I think it was around 4, right? 4 years old, he had that surgery, and he was under anesthesia too long, and they felt like he had some kind of brain damage from it. So I feel like that may have played a part too. But
yeah. I think that operation he had, which was he had a hernia at 4, and that in whatever way was a huge part of his development, because before that operation he was described as like a very, very happy, bubbly,
yeah,
joyous little kid. But after that operation, he was totally different afterward. Like, that's when he became very withdrawn and inward. And so there's something about that
yeah,
made a big difference. And also, as someone mentioned in the chat, like, his mother Joyce was prescribed a huge amount of medication during her pregnancy,
yeah,
which was very, very common for that period of time. So there's a lot of speculation that medication may have been a factor, in his neurological development as well. Yeah.
yeah. Could be. How do I get that down? Oh, there we go. I have a cousin who was under too long. He's never been the same since. He's mean and
Mm.
crazy AF too. My mom has she had a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and she hasn't been the same from it either, like ever. And she like hallucinate and just create things that aren't there. So I mean, it really can affect your thinking. And if you have damage to your prefrontal cortex, that really controls like your empathy, your decision making, just like a lot of emotions, stuff like that. Someone asked, has Josh ever spoke to Dahmer's brother?
No, I have not. Dahmer's brother David, after all this came out, changed his identity. So it is not definitively known where he is or what he is doing or even what his name is now. I have not personally spoken to any of Dahmer's family, nor have I spoken to any of the families of his victims. I did at one point in the development of my play. It was actually going to be a 2-person show. It was going to be Jeff and also Lionel sort of monologue.
I feel bad for Lionel.
You shouldn't. I'll talk more about that later.
Oh,
but
I do think he played a part in his like weird obsessions, but you know.
Yeah, but and Lionel's book, A Father's Story, which I highly recommend. It's one of, I think, the two or three best books written about this case, and it really gives you insight into Jeff's childhood that you don't find anywhere else. But I contacted a film producers who had worked on one of the various movies about Dahmer's life. I won't say which one, and asked them if told them I was writing this play and was using this material from Lionel's book, and asked if they would be able to put me in touch with him. And they responded back, and they gave me Lionel Dahmer's phone number and his email address. But they also said, I advise you not to get in contact, not to connect with him. And I won't go into why, because I don't want to get sued. But so I listened to them, and that's when I pivoted, and it became the 1-person show, which I think is what it was always meant to be.
Yeah. That's cool. So I'm just gonna start from the beginning and kind of go over Dahmer, and we'll I'm gonna try and present the case to everyone for who hasn't followed it. And like I said, Josh, if you feel like there's any important parts that you need to add, just cut me off and throw in there. So his childhood seemed like he had a very tumultuous childhood. His parents fought a lot. His mom she had postpartum depression, right? Where she did have some kind of postpartum depression. She was a hypochondriac. She was described as being greedy for attention. She stayed in bed a lot, and his dad was a chemist, I believe. So I believe he was home a lot by himself. And then he had a hernia surgery at the age right before his 4th birthday. And then that really, they think, messed with his brain. They said he was under anesthesia too long, and then he never was the same after that. And then at around 15 and 16, he said, so I went a lot off of his own testimonies, or the one lady, she had interviewed him a lot, and she goes up on the stand. I think it was I forget who the woman is that I watched, but she was probably the most knowledgeable, I felt like. But she seemed emotional abuse, that she was Buttercup, that she was abused or she was abusive. I felt like the mom seemed as though she was a little bit emotionally abusive to the family, in my opinion, from how they portrayed it, at least.
Yeah, Joyce Dahmer was a woman who's just in a lot of pain. Because again, we're talking the 1960s when she had her first child, and back then the expectation was you have to love being pregnant, you have to be a perfect mother and all these things, and she just felt so trapped by that, and
postpartum depression is no joke.
Before that was acknowledged as a thing, there's a lot of just emotional abuse going on, but I don't think she's an evil person, No,
either. I don't either. I mean, postpartum depression is terrible. I mean, I've never had it myself, but I've heard so many stories from people where it's just they want to connect with their babies and they can't, and it's just a really difficult thing. I think she was just I don't think she meant to be emotionally abusive either, but I think she just like because of her issues. But
Mm-hmm.
they seemed to fight a lot, and after his surgery, he was never the same. And then around 15 and 16 was when he realized that he was homosexual and he didn't have interest in women at the time, and he had very strong feelings about not wanting to be alone, which I think really played a big part in um, him murdering people down the line because he didn't want them to leave him. He had like an attachment issues. He discovered alcohol at a young age. They said he used to even like carry a flask in school and
Mm-hmm.
drink. Like he was an alcoholic probably around like 14, 15 years old. He would be coming in from school drunk.
And go to
Uh,
school drunk.
yeah, and go to school drunk. Yeah, he drank a lot. Like, let me move this down here so I don't have to start looking away. Uh, he when he was 15 or 16, he started first having sexual fantasies about striking someone. Like he wanted to, hey Queen Bee, he had the urge to like. I think his first urge was do like hiding in a bush and like jumping out at a jogger, like what he
Mm-hmm.
did in his first. Yeah, he says he had an urge to strike someone unconscious via a blow to the neck and then doing sexual acts to the body. Trigger warning, guys. This whole show is just a trigger warning.
Yeah.
There's nothing not triggering about Jeffrey Dahmer, so let me just say that now. um, so around that age, he went after a male jogger. I gotta find somewhere I can put this. There we go. He went after a male jogger. The jogger didn't come around. The jogger didn't come by. So all right. So he wanted to go after a male jogger, and then the male jogger didn't like go by him, so it didn't happen. He also had an interest in dead animals, and he was like oddly thrilled by their bones. And him and his dad would go like collect roadkill. Sounds bizarre, but so his dad said that because he was like a chemist, that he felt like he was kind of excited that his son actually showed interest in something, and I guess from like the science part about it, they used to go collect roadkill together, and they would bring it home and like dissect the roadkill, and they would bleach the bones and keep the bones, and Dahmer would actually call the bones fiddlesticks because he liked the noise the bones would make.
Cool. Can I
uh,
give some context here?
yeah.
Sweet. So a couple things. The fiddlesticks incident did really happen. It happened when Jeff was a younger child. When his dad was cleaning out like the space under the porch, and they found the bones of a dead bird, and Jeff kept picking them up and like laughing like they're just like fiddlesticks. One thing that the Netflix show does fictionalize, and I think it's important to note, is that Jeff and Jeff's father never was involved in the roadkill with his son. That's something the show does invent.
So he
Jeff,
didn't help him collect the roadkill. They
no,
fictionalized it. Okay.
yeah, no, Jeff always did that alone. And I think that's important to note. He did ask his father about like different chemicals and stuff, and that's when Lionel was like, "Oh, good, you're interested in chemistry like me. You have an interest. That's great." But the collecting of roadkill, Jeff kept totally secret. His parents didn't find that out until much later. So that's
They,
one of many things that the Netflix show sort of distorts a little
fictionalized.
bit. Mm-hmm.
So do you know if he actually killed any living animals, like instead of just getting roadkill?
Great question. To our knowledge, based on what he said, no, he never killed a living animal. There was an incident where he was going to. He found a stray dog, and this is again when he's a teenager, and he took it into the woods, which is where he always went to like go do his secret stuff. And he had a knife with him, and he was going to kill the dog, but he Sorry for all the dog lovers out there. But he described that, as he was about to kill this dog, he looked at the dog's eyes, and the dog's eyes were just looking at him, and he couldn't do it, and he told the dog to go. So he was going to, but couldn't bring himself to do it. But yeah,
I read there was a story where he found a dog's bones and pinned it to a tree, and then told his friend.
Mm-hmm.
And then told his friend that it was human bones or something to play a trick on him. He did some
that is true.
Weird stuff. Somebody asked about the tadpoles. Do you know if the tadpoles was a true story or?
No, it's not. Yeah, the tadpole. Yeah, episode. So I'll just say this, and if you go on my Facebook, I am fact checking all the episodes. They're all public posts. You can read them. But the third episode of the series, which largely deals with Dahmer's childhood, almost pretty much everything in that episode is fictionalized. It's inspired by the truth, but it's not actual real events, which is strange because there's extensive documentation of Dahmer's childhood. So I'm not sure why episode 3 of the show decided not to be super accurate with that. Yeah.
Probably to make it a little more extra, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So soon after, all this, when you realize around the age of 15 or 6, so all right, I'm confused on the timeline here. Was the hitchhiker that he picked up his first victim, was when right after he graduated high school, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So he had just graduated high school, and his mom had moved out of the home, and his dad had moved out already too because he was engaged to another woman. And Dahmer had the home to himself for the summer, for a little while. And he found a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. In the show, the guy's headed to a concert, I think, and he tells them that he'll give him a ride, but brings him back to his house so they can, smoke some weed. Stephen was not gay, but Jeff wanted to keep him there. And I guess he had an issue. Well, the Netflix documentary shows him trying to kiss him, and the guy wasn't okay with it.
That did happen.
Okay. And he wanted to keep him there, so he hit him with a barbell, weights, and then strangled him with the barbell. And then he smoked 2 joints and drank a 12-pack. Then he went to the store and purchased a large hunting knife, and then he went to the crawl space. This is triggering, guys. He cut off the arms, the legs, he opened the belly, and then he put the stuff in a trash bag and tried to take it to the dump at 3 o'clock in the morning. And a cop pulled him over. I believe he was given a sobriety test, and he passed the sobriety test, and the cop let him go. So he was probably spooked and then brought the stuff back home.
Oh, and it's even a little worse. So yeah, he passed the sobriety test, and then the cops were like, "Oh, what's in these garbage bags you've got in the back seat?" And Jeff said that his parents had been fighting, and he just collecting trash and doing yard work, and he was just taking it to the dump. And the cops were like, "No, it's too late to do that. Go back home." So this again, he could have been caught in this moment. If the police had been like, "No, open the bag, show me," it would have been over then. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, could you imagine if he had been caught in that moment? Everything would have changed, really, because he would have went to jail. I mean, he got out of being caught twice. Well, probably even more than that, but I mean the 2 times where the one guy got away and that. So he brought the where was I? He brought the body back. He said he was taking it to landfill. Hold on. He went back home and he put the bags in the crawl space. He brought the head upstairs and laid it on the floor. and I don't know what words I can say on YouTube,
Fair.
but he pleasured himself in front of it. And then the next day, he put the bags in the woods and burned the clothes, and he threw the necklace into the river. He said he had felt strung out and nervous and apprehensive and thought about what he had done. He pared the flesh from the bone with acid, then crushed the bones with a sledgehammer. Um, he was using a sledgehammer and just bashing the bones, and then he scattered them in the woods, right behind his house.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me see. He collected. In 1968, they moved to a home that had a hut. Oh, so this would have been before he graduated, right? Where they had the house with the hut. Yeah. So I didn't add this in there, but before he graduated, when he was collecting the roadkill, they had a house with like a hut in the back, and that's where he would take the roadkill and put like the bones and do the stuff with the dog to the tree. Yeah, Queen Bee. It's hard to watch. It's super. The show is super disgusting. Like they do go pretty in depth with it, I'll say.
Yeah.
So,
and I will say though, like, I do appreciate the show's restraint when it comes to showing or not showing murders or gore. You really don't see much of that at all, which I really applaud that choice. But it's a lot. It's not a happy story, it's a lot.
Yeah, it
Definitely
still
not
is a
something you
lot,
can
even though
binge.
they don't show the murders, but what they like the stuff that they do show is still a lot.
Yeah.
All right, so 6 weeks after the murder of Hicks, Dahmer's father and his fiance return home, where they discover Jeff living alone. And then that August, they convince him to enroll into college. I think he went to college for business for a little bit and then failed out of like all his
Yes.
classes because of his drinking.
Mm-hmm.
So then he joined the Army, where he was a medical specialist at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And then on August 13th, 1979, he was deployed to Germany, where he served as a combat medic.
Yep.
And they said he was like a pretty average to above average soldier, but his performance had deteriorated because of his drinking. And in March 1981, he was deemed unsuitable and discharged. He received an honorable discharge, and they basically had like a meeting with him and said like, "Hey man, we'll give you a ticket to go wherever you want." And he went to Miami for a little bit. That really didn't get a job for a little bit, and then that didn't pan out for him. So he ended up moving back home and moving in. Where did he go to his grandma's, or did he move into his grandma's? So he moved in his grandma's. Yeah, so while he was in Miami, he lived in he got him a job and lived in a motel, and then he was evicted, so that's why he moved to his grandma's. So when he returned home, 2 weeks after he came home, he was arrested for disorderly conduct. He had exposed himself to 25 people at a park.
Yes.
And he moved with Grandma August 7th, 1982. Does Josh believe the prison cards played a part on Dahmer being beaten to death?
Do you mean the prison guards? Or cards?
Might be guards.
Yeah. To speak to that, if guards is what you mean.
Yeah, she said that.
Oh, perfect. Yes, great. So again, this is something that we can't know for sure, but it is very convenient that all of a sudden these 3 inmates who are supposed to be supervised by guards at all times while they were doing work, all of a sudden the guards just weren't there, and then this happened. So I think it could have been, but again, that's something that we can't know for certain.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll try. If you guys have questions, I'll try and, if as long as I see them on passing, I will read them off. Okay, so where was I? He would go to gay bars in the area. One that he frequented was the Bath, or was it called the Bath or the Bathhouse?
It's a bathhouse, yeah.
Yeah, it was like an anything goes type gay bar, and he said he did not like anal sex. I probably shouldn't even. I don't know how to. I don't know how to say this on YouTube. He did not like doing it that way because it hurt him. So he would start drugging his partners with sleeping pills so they would stay. Like that's why he initially started doing that. I guess because they would expect that, and he didn't feel comfortable doing it. So he started drugging them. He
Again, it's
was
all
trying.
about being in control for him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he would not have. So he would give them sleeping pills so they would stay, but he would not have to perform that. He was trying to curb his impulses. So this one time he hid in a store till they closed, and he stole a mannequin and brought it home with him, and was like doing things to the mannequin, and his grandmother had found it, right, and made him get rid of it.
Yes. Yeah, and the way it's depicted, that is depicted in the show, is different from reality, because in the show his grandmother finds the mannequin like on Jeff's bed, but in reality Jeff kept the mannequin in his closet in his room in his grandma's house, and his grandmother opened the closet and the mannequin actually fell on her, and then she called
Oh wow.
Jeff's father. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I was folding a piece of paper and I didn't want it to make a lot of noise. All right, so he would fix a drink of like five or so sleeping pills, and he would lay with them and pleasure himself. He felt less rushed, he said, and he didn't have to like entertain them. So he liked it that way. Management at the bath ended up finding out what he was doing, and his membership was revoked. So then he started using a local hotel, which I believe was called the Ambassador Hotel, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There was a funeral of an 18 there oh my gosh, I forgot about this. There was a funeral of an 18-year-old male, and Dahmer had attempted to steal his body and failed. That's true story, right?
So that is something that, and I know it's
That's what I
depicted.
read on Wikipedia, but I just gotta make sure.
But in everything that I have ever read and watched about this case, and I've read and watched pretty much everything, I have never come across that he actually dug up a body. So as far as I know, and everything I've ever watched, like that did not actually happen. But if anyone comes up with sources for that aside from the Netflix show, I'd be very interested to see it. But
I think I got that from the lady who was on the stand during trial. I feel like that's where I heard it, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
I'll have to go back and look, but if I do find it, I will send it to you. But I think that's where, like, I think if I remember correctly, I could be totally wrong, but I think she said that he thought about it and he was going to do it, and then something went wrong and he wasn't able to. I don't know if he went as far as to like digging the guy up, but
right, yeah.
It was at least a thought that he told her, I believe. But
yes, yeah, that I know is true. But as the show depicts him actually digging up the body, and like
I don't think he ever was able to do that.
Yeah.
So on September 8th, 1986, he was arrested for lewd and lascivious. Am I saying that right? Lascivious behavior. For pleasuring himself in the presence of two 12-year-old boys as he stood close to the Kinnickinnic River. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. Kinnickinnic. That's how it's spelled. He initially claimed he had been urinating and unaware that they were there, but later admitted that he did it. The charge was changed to disorderly conduct, and he was sentenced to a year on probation and counseling. So he's still using the Ambassador Hotel, and this is when he comes on his second victim. So basically, this is like 10 years after his first victim. Like, a lot of time has went by. And this guy named Stephen Toomey, am I saying that right?
Toomey.
On November 20th, 1978, he encountered a 25-year-old man from Ontonagon, Michigan. He encountered him at a bus stop. It says at a bus stop or a bar. I'm not sure which one it is, but asked him to spend the night with him, and he agreed. He said he had no intention of murdering him, but rather drug him and explore his body. They had fake intercourse, which was like hugging and kissing and pleasuring themselves, and he drugged him, and also he drank a lot himself, and he claimed that he drank so much he blacked out, and when he woke up, he was laying on top of Toomey. His chest was crushed in and black and blue with bruises, and blood was seeping from the corner of his mouth. And Dahmer's fist and forearm was extensively bruised. He said Stephen's head was over the side of the bed, and it had brought back memories of 1968, and that he rented the room. He rented the room for another night and bought a suitcase and put the body in the suitcase, and that at 1 a.m. he checked out and took the body to his grandma's. And he kept it in, I think it's called a root cellar. It sounded like they said fruit cellar, but it's a
fruit cellar. Yeah.
Fruit cellar?
Yeah, and this is
a root cellar.
Yeah, and this is one of those things that like sounds like it's got to be made up and not true, but it is, because like in the Alfred Hitchcock movie Psycho, like Norman Bates keeps his mother down in the fruit cellar, and the fact that like Dahmer did the same thing, like you dismember bodies like in his grandmother's fruit cellar, is such a strange and eerie and ridiculous parallel that is actually true.
Yeah, super creepy. He actually had a lot of victims. Well, not a lot, but a few in his grandma's cellar. So he kept the body for 9 days, and one day while his grandma was at church, he went down there and opened the belly and pleasured himself. He severed the head, the arms, legs from the torso, and then filleted the bones from the body before cutting the flesh into small enough pieces to handle. He placed the flesh in garbage bags. He wrapped the bones inside a sheet and pounded them to splinters with a sledgehammer, similar to what he did with his first victim. It took him about 2 hours, and he disposed of all the remains in the trash, excluding the severed head. For a total of 2 weeks, he retained the victim's head wrapped in a blanket. This is terrible. After he boiled the head in a mix of Soilex, which was like an industrial detergent, and bleach in an effort to retain the skull, which he then used as stimulus for pleasuring himself. Eventually, the skull was too brittle, and he pulverized that as well. Due to the difficulty of him having to move the body from like in a suitcase and all that, he started getting men to come to his grandma's house instead of the hotel. So 2 months after Toomey, he encountered a 14-year-old Native American boy / male prostitute named James Doxtator.
Doxtator, yeah.
Doxtator. Wow, that's a young age to be a male.
Yeah, and that's I think a really important thing, is that, because people often say like, oh, Dahmer killed 17 men. He killed 15 men and 2 14-year-old children. James Doxtator was 14, and later on Conrad Synthesomphone was also 14 years old. Yeah.
He lured him with $50 to pose for nude pictures. They hung out in his grandma's living room while she was asleep. He didn't want him to leave, so he drugged him and he strangled him on the floor of the cellar. Then he had sex with him, but I don't want to say the word. He ate breakfast with his grandma and he kept the body for a week and disposed of him basically the same way as he did to me. And then on March 24th, 1988, a bisexual man, he was 22, I believe, this guy, Richard Guerrero,
Yes.
outside a gay bar called the Phoenix. He lured him with $50, drugged him, and strangled him with a leather strap. He performed oral sex on his corpse and disposed of him the same way. And then pretty much exactly a month later, well, like one day less than a month, on April 23rd, he brought another man, but Grandma saw this guy and he let him go. His name was Ronald Douglas Flowers. Was that the guy? Ronald Douglas Flowers, that was his name?
Correct.
Yeah, he saw him at a phone booth and offered to give him coffee that was drugged, and he woke up at... So was that where he gave the guy... I feel like my notes are weird. Hold on. So the grandma, and he let him go, and then... So was Ronald Douglas Flowers the one that got away? Like that.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So who was the one that he accidentally drugged himself? Or no, he left Ronald at the hospital, right? I was getting confused with the time where he accidentally drugged himself. But yeah, this time he drugged the guy and he dropped him off at the hospital, and the guy woke up missing all his cash, bracelets, and gold chain, and his underwear was on inside out. I got that confused because I was like, hold up, maybe this is the time where he accidentally drank the wrong drink. So then in September, which is a few months later, his grandma asked him to move out because of the drinking, the men, and the foul smells coming from the basement and garage. He found a one-bedroom apartment on 808 North 24th Street. 2 days later, he was arrested for fondling a 13-year-old boy whom he lured to his home with $50 to pose nude for pics. And then his dad hired an attorney, Gerald Boyle, who requested psyche evals, where they said he harbored deep feelings of alienation. He was an impulsive individual, suspicious of others, and that he was also a schizoid. He also had a schizoid personality disorder. On January 30th, 1989, he pled guilty to the charges of second-degree assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. And then he moved back to Grandma's. So he was only at this place for like a really short time before he moved back to Grandma's house. And then 2 months after his conviction, he murdered his fifth victim, a mixed-race 24-year-old aspiring model, Anthony Sears. He met him at a gay bar on March 25th, 1989. He lured him to his grandma's house, killed him, and placed him in his grandma's bathtub. Wow, that's pretty brave. Like, how that surprises me that he would be willing to put this guy in his grandma's bathtub and not worried that she would like walk, unless she had an extra bathroom, I guess, maybe that she didn't use, but still.
Yeah, I mean, and by this time, like, and you know, Jeff really did love his grandmother. She's one of the few people in his life that he actually like expressed having like affection for. But by this time, she was very afraid of him. You know, so she.
So do you think she knew that he was like killing people? Like, or she sensed it, or like, or do you think she just thought he was strange? And, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she ever got to the point of thinking that he was actually killing people. It is also important to note that she was starting to show signs of Alzheimer's or dementia during this time as well. But there's also the element, which I think is important to remember, that like, again, like seeing seeing your grandson like bringing these men home and not only that, but bringing these men of color home. So there's, again, like you have to keep in mind like the homophobia and the racism, that bias is
things
here
were
too.
a lot
It's
different
like,
then.
I want to look away from it. I don't want to see what you're doing,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, that's just crazy to me that he would, put him in his grandma's bathtub. So he basically disposed the body similar to the other way, like the other ways, and he found Sears to be exceptionally attractive. So he permanently retained his body parts. He placed his man bits in acetone and placed them in a wooden box. I don't know how else to say it without using words that might get me banned from YouTube.
Yeah.
Which he would later put in his work locker. When he moved to a new address, he took them with him there. On May 23rd, 1989, he was sentenced to 1 year in jail, but was able to work on work release and 5 years probation, where he got out because he lived with his grandma before moving to the Oxford Apartments in May of 1990. This was
Can I say something important? Can I say something right here? So, what Kate said is super important. So he's sentenced to 5 years probation, for the molestation. So keeping in mind, being on probation, you're supposed to meet once a week or once every 2 weeks with your probation officer as a check-in. Jeff Dahmer's probation officer never checked in with him. So again, this is another instance of the system failing, and another instance that if the probation officer was doing the job that they were supposed to be doing, again, maybe someone would have noticed something was wrong and stopped it. Yeah.
So he used his own prescription to drug the victim, someone said?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so he had a prescription for something for insomnia, and he used that. Okay. So then he moves to North 25th Street. This is like the last place, right? This is where he did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is like where he got brave and started doing crazy stuff because he really didn't have to like hide anything. You know what I mean? So he moved to North 25th Street in Milwaukee, close to his work. It was a fully furnished apartment at $300 a month, including bills. So it was, pretty good deal to him. He was obsessed with Return of the Jedi and Exorcist 3, right? Like he liked those movies because there was evil men who had power. Like if you've ever seen Star Wars, which is one of my favorite movies ever, Emperor Palpatine is evil, but if you use the dark side of the Force, it's really strong, and you use your evil to make you stronger. And he was also fixated with The Exorcist 3. Mm-hmm. I think I might have wrote down what he maybe I didn't. But he would play these movies for his victims. Like he'd bring them over and make them watch Return of the Jedi and Exorcist 3. I don't know how I would have felt about watching Exorcist 3, but Return of the Jedi, that would have been all right for me. So on May 25th, 1990, so he moved on May 23rd. Is that when he moved there? And then on May 20, within 1 week of moving, I wrote that down. He killed his first victim at the apartment, Raymond Smith. Raymond was a 32-year-old prostitute. He lured him to his apartment with a $50 promise. He drugged and strangled him. The following day, Dahmer bought a Polaroid camera with which he took several pics of his body in suggestive positions before dismembering him in the bathroom. He, trigger warning guys, boiled his legs, arms, and pelvis in a steel kettle with Soilex, which allowed him to rinse the bones in the sink. He dissolved the remains in a container filled with acid. That was the 57-gallon bin, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So he
the
brought
drum.
this like 57-gallon drum that he filled with acid, and he would just throw parts in there. And
It was in the
that's
corner of his bedroom. Yeah.
yeah, that's where a lot of the smell would come from. They even have a picture on Wikipedia. I can show you guys what it actually looked like if you want to see the drum. But if you watched the Netflix documentary, I feel like the drum looked pretty close to what it actually looked like. They did a pretty good job.
And in the first, I think it's the first episode, the news footage of like, people bringing the drum outside of the apartment, that is the actual news footage. It's not a recreation.
So the pictures are real pictures too, right? Like the pictures are the actual real photos?
Yes, they are, and I'll just say something about that, because years ago when I started working on the play that I wrote, like those pictures were not on the internet. Now they are. So they are available to look at with a quick Google search. I really advise you not to do it, because like there are some things that you just can't unsee, and trust me, you don't want to see it. But it's there. It's there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
See, I'm one of those people who was just nosy, and I would probably want to go look at it, but I'm glad you told me because I probably won't now. But I feel like I need to I like visual, like when I'm going through cases, I like having visuals and like it but it's probably not a visual that I would want to see. But
yeah, and for me, like because I was writing this play and because I was going to portray this person, like I did look at all of them because I felt like if I'm telling this story, I have a responsibility to tell the truth and to really take in what it is, and to know it, I felt like that was important.
I'm sure it was probably a little I mean, like, how hard was it for you to get into character? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you have to go to a really dark place to get into the character of, like, Jeffrey Dahmer. And
yeah, I mean, and it was really hard because I've done like the play 6 different times. And the first couple times, it honestly was very, very hard for me to go to that place and not be able to let it go. But fortunately, the director of the play, the third time that we did it, was like, I want to know what you know. Like, show me what you know. And that honestly was so helpful. The fact that it wasn't just me having to carry all of this stuff. To be able to share the burden of it, because it is a burden, to live in that place, to live in his mind, and with everything he did. So the next 3 times I did it, it was much easier to sort of to be able to go there, but also just to then after the show just let it go, and not carry it.
Yep. So he would later spray paint the skull alongside the skull of Sears upon a black towel inside a metal filing cabinet. 1 week after he lured another man, Cash D, that was his name? This is where he drank the wrong drink. So he lured a man named Cash D, and Dahmer went to drug him and accidentally drank the wrong drink and drugged himself. This is what I was thinking about the other time. And the intended victim stole Dahmer's clothes, $300, and a watch. And then, so where were we? That was on May. I don't know. All right, so he went after that guy a week later. And then the next was, it couldn't have been a week later, though, because he got the guy on May 25th. And then this guy was supposedly on May 27th. The next was a 16-year-old boy with initials LP. I guess, did they not want to share his name? I guess they didn't want to share his name because of, this was probably when I was watching the trial. They probably didn't want to share his name, but he was a young Hispanic male. He He had no pills, so he took pics and had him lay on his stomach and struck him with a mallet. And the guy got up and attempted to leave. Jeff calmed down and let him go. He did call the police, but the police never followed up. So he literally struck this guy with a mallet, and the guy called the police, and the police didn't do anything about it.
Yep.
I wonder if was that. Do you know if that guy was like a prostitute or anything like that?
It's not known. I mean, and I think it's important to stress that like a lot of the men that were approached by Dahmer, not all of them were necessarily gay, but they did need money. And I think that's a huge part of this too, is that I think the Netflix show actually does a really great job of capturing this. Because like Dahmer in life repeatedly said, like, it wasn't because they were black or whatever, it was because I thought they were beautiful. And in the show, a black policeman responds, "No, I'm not buying that. You moved into the black community in a place where you knew it was an underserved population, where the police weren't going to pay attention, and you preyed on because you knew you could get away with it." Yep. So I think that's important. That's important too. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like that's, like the fact that they didn't even follow up is just crazy to me. Like, so he gets hit in the head with a mallet and they never follow up on it. So then in June, which they don't have an exact date, but it says June 1990. So it's really like not far away, like within the next month. He drugged and strangled a man named Edward Smith. He went to Sears and bought a 5-square-foot freezer and placed his skeleton in there for months, hoping it would retain moisture to avoid making the bones brittle. So he wanted to keep the bones. He had this plan to build an altar out of bones, and when they got brittle, he couldn't use them. So he was hoping that the freezer would maintain the moisture so they wouldn't get brittle. It didn't work, and he was acidified months later. He flushed the remains down the toilet, and the neighbor complained about the smell, and he said that his deep freezer broke and he had a bunch of meat in there. He put the guy's skull in the oven to dry, and it exploded. He felt rotten about this because he could not retain any of the parts. So he's like really upset that he wasn't able to retain any of it. Yeah, the cops could have definitely prevented so many deaths that they just flat. I mean, there were several times where he could have been caught. And so next was 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Less than 3 months later, he met him at a bookstore and offered him $50. Now, mind you guys, this is like in the early 90s. $50 was probably, a significant amount of money for people. Now, $50 really isn't that much, but then, it was worth more. So he offered to give him $50 to listen to his heart and his stomach, and when he tried to perform oral sex on Miller, he said it will cost you more, and he gave him a drink with 2 sleeping pills because that's all he had left. He killed Miller by slashing his carotid artery with the same knife he used to dissect victims' bodies. Miller bled to death within minutes. He then posed the nude body for various suggestive Polaroid photos after dismembering him. Didn't he, when he would dismember the bodies, didn't he take photos of the whole process?
Yes, he would sometimes. Yeah.
So he was literally, as he was in the bathroom dismembering this guy's body, he was talking to the guy's head that he took off his body. He wrapped his heart and biceps and portions of his flesh from the legs in plastic bags and placed them in the freezer for later consumption. He boiled the remaining flesh and organs into a jelly-like substance in Soilex, which enabled him to rinse the flesh off the skeleton so he could retain it. He placed the bones in a light bleach solution for 24 hours before allowing them to dry upon a cloth for a week. The head he put in the fridge, stripped it, and spray painted it with enamel. And he tenderized the heart and ate it. So he said, like, eating his victims, he felt like it made him closer to them. Somebody said, "Who flushes meat down a toilet?" Well, he could have put it in the well, I don't know. Maybe he put it in the Soilex first, and it was.
Yeah, and you always have to keep in mind too with all this stuff that like he always had to get very 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 drunk when he did this. So he never did any of this when he was like sober and thinking clearly. So like stuff like that, like pouring someone's remains down the toilet, not someone who's thinking clearly. Like, and especially as he goes on, the drinking is pretty much constant. Like he's pretty much constantly drunk, and like his mental state is deteriorating too. So he starts making more and more foolish, risky decisions. Yeah.
Yep. Someone said, didn't he call them his friends, like the remains? Did he like refer to them as his friends?
Yeah, I mean, because he didn't have any friends that were alive.
Mm-hmm.
And even times when there were men that he did have a connection with, and the like guys actually that really did like him, like, and could have potentially had maybe an actual normal relationship with, like he still couldn't get over the fact that no, they're going to leave one day. So yeah, that's why with the whole the keeping of the remains and the eating of the remains was to keep them close, to feel like he wasn't alone, that they were still there, and also that he still had control over them too, which again is another important piece of this puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, like, this is just a question I was thinking about. The Netflix documentary made it seem like him and was it Anthony Hughes?
Yes.
Had like a relationship for like some time. Was that true, or was it just like a one night thing?
So there are conflicting reports about that. There are some witnesses and folks who knew Tony Hughes that say that he never met Dahmer before that night, but there are also other people that came forward that said that they had known each other for up to 6 months and like had been in a sense dating. Dahmer did reference in his confession that there was one of the victims in particular that he liked very much and really wanted to have a potential life with. And he didn't name that person in his confession, but a lot of people have suspected that Tony Hughes is that person, but we don't really know for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so there was somebody, but you don't know who. All right, so 3 weeks later, on September 24th, Dahmer met David Thomas. He was 22 at the mall and asked him to come over for drinks. After drugging him, he did not feel attracted to him, but he was afraid that he would wake up, so he killed him and he photographed the dismemberment process and did not retain any of his body. After that, he did not kill anyone for about 5 months because of some unsuccessful attempts at luring men, and apparently he was like depressed for a little bit, they said, or that it could have been because of depression. And then in February of 1991, so a couple of months later, about 5 months later, like I said, Curtis Straughter, he was 17. He offered money to pose nude. Dahmer drugged him, cuffed his hands behind his back, and strangled him with a leather strap. He retained his skull, hands, and his bits. He photographed each stage of this as well. And then on April 7th, which this is a couple months later too, usually they were pretty close together, 19-year-old Errol Lindsay, he was a heterosexual male. Dahmer lured him and drugged him and drilled a hole. This is trigger warning, guys. He drilled a hole in his skull and poured hydrochloric acid in it. Lindsay awoke saying, "I have a headache. What time is it?" And he drugged him again, then strangled him. He retained his skull and placed his skin in solution of cold water and salt to retain it. He ended up disposing of it after it became frayed and brittle. And then several Oxford apartment residents complained to the building's manager, Sopa Princewell, of the foul smells coming from the apartment. Apartment 213, in addition to the sound of falling objects and the sound of a chainsaw. He claimed the freezer broke and his tropical fish died. So like they were his excuses. I do think it's weird. Like, did he give any reason for the sound of a chainsaw? Like,
no, not really. He just said, like, he would say, like, "Oh, I was just fixing something," or I was like, I working, you know, I was just working on a project. And in one of those instances, when Jeff said, "Oh, like, you know, my freezer broke and all the meat expired," the manager actually came into the apartment and helped Jeff clean the freezer.
no.
So again, this is another one of those moments where, like, and again, he's got a 57-gallon drum in his bedroom
And it stinks.
with body parts in it. And yeah, this is another one of those times when if someone had like, "Oh, can I look in your bedroom?" Again,
I can't imagine being like the apartment manager. Like, I would have been like, you don't know that this guy is like a serial killer, and here you're in his house helping him clean his freezer when he could have been like one of his victims. Ugh, that's so creepy.
Mm-hmm.
So then like a little over a month later, Dahmer encountered a 14-year-old Lao. Is that how you say it? Lao, Lao. His
Leo, yeah.
A teenager named Konarak Synthesomphone. Am I saying that right?
Synthesomphone.
Konarak,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Konarak Synthesomphone on Wisconsin Ave. Unknown to Dahmer, he was the little brother of the boy Dahmer had like fondled in 1988. So literally, this is the guy's brother. He offered him money for photos. He was reluctant and posed for 2 pictures in his underwear before Dahmer drugged him. Dahmer drilled a hole, trigger warning guys, in his frontal lobe and poured acid in it. But before he fell unconscious, he led him into his bedroom where the body of Tony Hughes. How did I miss Tony Hughes' whole story? I don't know why I've totally. Lindsay. I don't know how I missed Tony. Maybe I put it after that. I think they talk about it after this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think like they go from one to the other. Okay, so
yeah, it's important to note, just as a side note, Anthony Tony Hughes was deaf. And if you watch one episode of the Netflix Dahmer series, watch episode 6, which really stands on its own. You don't need to watch any of the other episodes to watch it, but episode 6 of that show is centered entirely from Tony Hughes's viewpoint, and almost all of the episode is silent, and the dialogue is subtitled American Sign Language.
It was super emotional too. Like they didn't even say much, but it was so like. That episode had me so upset.
Yeah, like I've never seen a piece of television that like centers the experience of a deaf or hard of hearing person like that. It was so respectfully done, still very emotional and hard to watch, but like if you watch one episode of it, watch that one.
Yeah, it was done very well. Well, I don't know why it totally skipped over Anthony Hughes, but Anthony Hughes was the guy who I was talking about who was deaf, and they portrayed like they had a relationship, so that's why I had asked Josh if maybe there was like a little relationship going on, and that could have been the guy that he tried to have a relationship with. But the body of Hughes was naked on the floor as he led Conorak into the room, and he didn't even notice that he was there. Or, well, he didn't react to him being there. I don't know if he noticed or not, because you remember he drilled like a hole in his skull and poured acid in there. But his Tony Hughes' body was still in the room from 3 days earlier. Dahmer claimed that that Conorak seen the body, but did not react to the bloated corpse. Was how he described it. So he became unconscious, and wait, where am I? Yeah, he became unconscious, and Dahmer laid with him, and then Dahmer left his apartment to go drink and purchase more alcohol, which was really dumb of him to do, but I guess he felt like, that he wasn't capable of doing what he did after what he did to him. But then in the early morning hours of May 27th, Dahmer returned to find him sitting naked in the corner of 25th, on the corner of 25th and State, talking in loud with 3 distressed young women standing near him. Dahmer tried to walk him to his apartment, saying that he was drunk, and the 3 women said they called 911. The cops came, and Dahmer said it was his 19-year-old boyfriend, that they got into a quarrel, and that he acts this way when he's drunk. The 3 women were literally stunned, and police told them to basically, quote unquote, butt out and shut the hell up. That's what they quoted in the thing. I don't. Upon the departure, he trigger warning, injected hydrochloric acid into his brain, and it proved fatal. He took the next day off from work and retained both skulls. So I think there's even a 911 call, right, where the lady is on the phone with the police and literally like begging the police, like, this kid, she's like, he's young, I seen him outside, like, and they're just totally ignoring this woman.
Yeah, and this is like, I think, one of the worst instances of the police being complete fuck ups, just to be put out there, because a couple important things. So the women who found Conorak on the side, naked on the sidewalk and bleeding, they were all black. The police that responded were white. Dahmer was white. So they believed the white guy, and they actually threatened to arrest the black women if they didn't shut up and leave.
Oh my gosh.
Basically.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the police literally walked Dahmer and Conorak back into Dahmer's apartment. Went into Dahmer's apartment. Sat Conorak down on the sofa where he seemed to pass out. And what Dahmer did was he showed the police the photographs that he'd taken of Conorak earlier, of Conorak in his underwear. It's like, yeah, this is my boyfriend. And the police.
Oh yeah, he showed them the pictures, saying that they were like, they went up to his door, saying that they were messing around.
Yeah, and the police were disgusted by this. And left the apartment. And then minutes later, Dahmer killed Conorak, sent to some phone. And there is a phone call that is publicly available. It's in I think it's in the documentary, the Jeffrey Dahmer Files shows it. But where it's the police radioing into headquarters, and they're saying, the intoxicated Asian male was returned to his sober boyfriend. That is depicted in the Netflix show. What the Netflix show does not depict is that while the police are saying that sentence, they are laughing and giggling about it.
Oh my goodness.
Look at the gays, and it's just absolutely disgusting. And the same thing with that 911 call that is also depicted in the show. It is the actual text. It's the actors playing the role saying it, but it's the actual text. Those 2 police officers, after this all came out, they were suspended from duty. After Dahmer died a few years later, they were rehired, and one of them became the head of the Milwaukee Police Union in 2008. Their names are publicly available. They are horrible people. Yeah, just wanted
That's
to put that out.
terrible. I can't believe they even got their jobs back after that.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yep. Sure did.
so the next victim on June 30th, Matt Turner in Chicago, accepted Dahmer's offer to travel to Milwaukee for a photo shoot. He drugged, strangled, and dismembered him. And then 5 days later, he met Jeremiah Weinberger. He
Yes.
drugged and twice injected. All right, so apparently he wasn't happy with how the hydrochloric acid that he injected into their skulls had worked. And this time he used boiling water.
Yeah, and to give some background on that, so why he was doing this, and I know like a lot of people were like, "Oh, Dahmer making zombies," kind of thing, and like mock it. But the reason why he was doing that is he decided, like, he didn't, because his whole goal was to have someone stay with him forever. And obviously, he reached a point where he didn't want to kill people anymore, but he still had this compulsion to have someone with him. So he had the idea of injecting the acid into the brain in the hope that it would be almost like a lobotomy kind of thing, that it would
So that it wouldn't kill them, but make them just totally unaware
the
of like
perfect,
what's going
like, submissive boyfriend who would just like do whatever Jeff wanted. And yeah, obviously the hydrochloric acid, would kill people, as any person in their right mind would know. So he tried the boiling water instead to see if that would work.
Yeah, somebody said that he said he was into athletic builds and dark-skinned men, but he wasn't crazy. He very well knew what he was doing. I think he picked a certain neighborhood and picked those men so they would not even be a suspect. He himself stated that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and that's why he had so many locks on the door. A true sociopath.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. Like he said over and over, like, I knew every step of the way, I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I did it anyway. And that he always took the blame on himself. It's like, no, I did this. Like, this is what I did. Yeah.
So and then on June 30th, Matt Turner, oh yeah, I said that, never mind, I'm on Jeremiah Weinberger. He drugged and twice injected boiling water into his skull, sending him into a coma. He died 2 days later. And on July 15th, Oliver Stacy, Dahmer unsuccessfully attempted to render him unconscious with chloroform. He requested a day's absence from work and was suspended. After strangling, he basically performed, I'm just going to say necrophilia instead of saying, before dismembering him, and placed his head and heart in the fridge and his skeleton in the freezer. On July 19th, he was fired, and that day he lured 25-year-old Joseph Bradehoff.
Yes.
He was strangled and left lying on Dahmer's bed, covered with a sheet for 2 days. On July 21st, Dahmer removed the sheets and found him covered with maggots, where he deep cleaned and put it in the fridge and acidified Bradehoff's torso and the other two torsos. So his arrest on July 22nd, 1991, Dahmer approached three men and offered $100 for photos. One of the trio, Tracy Edwards, 32, agreed to join him. Real quick before I go into this, Tracy Edwards, on like the 20th anniversary of Dahmer, I believe, got arrested for murdering a homeless man.
Yeah.
That just came out.
I mean, and Tracy, and to speak briefly to that, Tracy Edwards, dealt after everything that he went through and the PTSD from that, did go through a long period where he struggled with substance abuse, and things like that.
Sure, it's super traumatic to
give some context for him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's probably super traumatic, like survivor's guilt. You know what I mean? To know that you're somebody who survived, and plus everything that I mean, I had a hard time even watching. That was like the first episode, right, when
Yeah.
they did Tracy, and right away I was like, oh my gosh, like they really. I think they did that well, like the opening scene with that, because that had me like stressed watching it in the first episode, and that just had me hooked for the rest. They did a good job with that, I think.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
upon entering the apartment, Tracy noted a foul odor and boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor. Dahmer claimed to use them for cleaning bricks. After some minor conversation, Edwards responded to Dahmer's request to look at his tropical fish, and Dahmer placed a handcuff on his wrist but couldn't get the other. So he basically like handcuffed his one hand and he wasn't able to get the other. And well, inside the bedroom, noted nude male posters on the wall, and that a videotape of The Exorcist 3 was playing on the TV. He also noted that a blue 57-gallon drum in the corner that smelled terrible. Dahmer brandished a knife and informed Edwards he intended to take new photos of him. In an attempt to appease Dahmer, he unbuttoned his shirt, saying he would allow him to do so if he took off the handcuffs. Dahmer ignored and looked at the TV. He started rocking and chanting and placed his head on Edwards' chest and listened to his chest with the knife against him and told Edwards that he was going to eat his heart. He asked Dahmer if they could sit in the living room with the air conditioning, so he waited for a good moment and he punched Dahmer in the face and ran out the door. So did they go to the living room or did he punch him in the face in the bedroom?
As far as I can recall, it was in the that is correct, that it was in the living room, that they were in the bedroom, but he asked, like, can we go into where the air conditioning is?
Because it smelled or something. I think he used that excuse.
Mm-hmm.
So he got out of the house, and at 11:30 p.m. on July 22nd, Edwards flagged down the Milwaukee police, Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And at the corner of North 25th Street. The officers noted he had a handcuff on his wrist, and he said a freak placed handcuffs on him and asked if they could remove them. And when their handcuff key didn't work, he agreed to accompany the officers to the apartment, which had to be terrifying. I wouldn't even want to go back up there after that. Somebody told me they were going to eat my heart and was holding a knife to me. I would not want to go anywhere near there. But so Dahmer invited them in and acknowledged that he did it, but offered no explanation why. Edwards told the officers he brandished a large knife and this happened in the bedroom. Dahmer made no comment, and they said the key was at the bedside table. Dahmer attempted to pass him to get to the key to get it himself, but the second officer, Roth, said, back off. Mueller noted there was a large knife beneath the bed, and he also saw an open drawer which, upon closer inspection, contained Polaroids, many of which were human bodies in various stages of dismemberment. The decor indicated they were taken at the apartment, and he showed his partner, who said, these are for real. He fought the officers and resisted arrest, but they got him at this point. Mueller opened the fridge and found the fresh head of a black male on the bottom shelf. Dahmer then muttered, for what I did, I should be dead. Milwaukee MBI comes and finds 4 severed heads in his kitchen. A total of 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached, were found in Dahmer's bedroom and closet. They collected blood drippings upon a tray at the bottom of the fridge, and 2 human hearts and a portion of arm muscle, each wrapped inside plastic bags upon the shelves. In his freezer was an entire torso plus a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to ice at the bottom. They also discovered 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved pen 15s. I don't know how to say that. a mummified scalp, and in a 57-gallon drum, 3 further dismembered torsos dissolving in an acid solution. A total of 74 Polaroid pictures. In the early morning of July 23, 1991, Dahmer was questioned by Detective Patrick Kennedy and Dennis Murphy. They conducted 60 hours of interviews. He waived his right to a lawyer and said he caused this horror. It only makes sense. I do everything to put an end to it. He readily admitted to murdering 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987, and Stephen Hicks was killed in Ohio in 1978. Murders at Oxford involved ritual posing the victims' bodies in suggestive positions and typically with the chest thrusted outward prior to dismemberment. He admitted to necrophilia with several of the victims' bodies, including sexual acts with the viscera. What is a viscera? I don't know what that is. Hold on.
Like the internal organs. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, in the abdomen and the intestines. Okay. Ew. He first removed their internal organs and suspended the torso so the blood drained into the tubs. The bones he did not wish to keep were pulverized and acidified with Soilex and bleach solutions used to aid in the preservation. He confessed to have consumed the hearts, livers, and biceps and portions of the thighs of several victims, often tenderizing the flesh and organs prior to consuming them in meals, flavored with various condiments. He said he was so swept up in the compulsion to kill, it was incessant, never-ending desire to be with somebody at whatever cost, someone good-looking, really nice-looking. It just filled my thoughts all day long. He was preserving bones because he had intended to display on a black tape. Preserve the bones because he intended on constructing a private altar of victims' skulls, which he had intended to display on a black table located in his living room, upon which of skulls was to be adorned on each side with the complete skeletons of Miller and Lacey. So he basically wanted to make like an altar with the skulls and then like the complete skeletons on the end. I think they actually have. Hold on a minute. I'll show you guys.
Yeah, the drawing.
He draws he draws a drawing of his like what he wanted his altar to look like. They have it on here. Here we go. You just gotta make it bigger so you guys can see it. So this was his altar. This was going to be Miller right here, and this is going to be Lacey, and this is going to be the table, and these were going to be all the painted skulls going across the table. I guess in front of a window that was going to be covered with black shower curtains, and a lamp with globe lights behind it, and a black and white carpet, and a black plush chair he wanted to put in front of the altar where he could sit.
Yeah, and he said to the police afterwards that if he had been caught several months later than he was, this would have been found in his apartment.
Oh, yeah. I think by that point he had like a pretty good collection where he could start constructing that, unfortunately. So the trial began on January 30th, 1982. He was tried for 15 counts of first-degree murder. The defense argued Dahmer was insane due to his necrophilic drive, that he was a necrophiliac. They diagnosed him with necrophilia. I don't know if bipolar disorder, unless that's borderline personality. That might be borderline personality.
Borderline, yeah.
Okay, so necrophilia, borderline personality disorder, schizotypical personality disorder, alcohol dependence, and psychotic disorder. Prosecution believed he was cunning and calculated and knew the difference between right and wrong. Dahmer was not a sadist. They've shown that Dahmer planned with ample time, so it was not impulsive. He suggested that Dahmer may have had Asperger's. That's interesting. Two soldiers have since claimed that they have been RAPED by Dahmer. One said that he had done that to him over a 17-month period while they were both stationed in Baumholder, and while another soldier believes Dahmer drugged and RAPED him inside an armored personal carrier in 1979. Dahmer claimed he did not engage them. Mm-hmm. And then they do show in the Netflix documentary that his dad has like a really hard time with this, and that he writes a book about it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, what did you want to get into where you were talking about the dad, and you said that he's not as like innocent in all this?
Sure. And I'll clear up a couple of things that the Netflix series shows that are not accurate. Like I said much earlier, like Lionel, Jeff's dad, dissecting the roadkill with Jeff is fictional. Mm-hmm. That never happened. Lionel was really uncomfortable and ashamed of his son's homosexuality. And was very distant towards him, as his mother was too.
So he wasn't as close with them as they made it seem like in the show.
No, he and Jeff and Lionel actually became much closer once Jeff was in prison. That was really the first time when they once everything was out in the open, they really started, actually having real conversations and talking. As I said earlier, Lionel's book, A Father's Story, I highly recommend reading it. I think it's one of the 2 or 3 best books written about this. Gives great insight into Jeff's childhood. It is true, as the Netflix show depicts, that Lionel had sort of disturbing fantasies that he never acted on when he was growing up. He had fantasies of having the power to hypnotize a girl so he could do whatever he wanted. And Lionel would have, when he was a teenager, would have these recurring dreams where he would wake up and knowing that he had killed somebody, and he actually hadn't. But like waking up with that feeling. So, he wondered, if there was something in him that passed on to his son. Lionel was required to give a portion of the proceeds from his book, A Father's Story, to the victims' families. The victims' families never received a cent from him.
They never received any money at all?
Nope, they did not. And
now, could they take him to court for that?
They tried to.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was unsuccessful. And as is depicted in the Netflix show, Lionel Dahmer was, not just like a very conservative Christian, but Lionel Dahmer was a creationist Christian, meaning that like the Bible's the literal truth. Like, there's no dinosaurs and like stuff like that. That everything is with the Bible, and he converted Jeff to that school of thought of Christianity as well.
Even though he was a scientist, he would.
As some folks do, like he became much more conservative as he got older. But he, and the thing that I find really, really upsetting and disgusting is that Lionel has had all these years a small collection of Jeff's possessions, including the last glasses that he wore in prison, and like photographs and Jeff's Bibles he had in prison, the urn that Jeff's ashes were kept in. They buried Jeff's ashes in a secret location that no one knows, but he kept the urn. Lionel Dahmer gave all those items to an online collector who is currently, now that the Netflix show is possible, is selling them for thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Lionel gets a cut of that money. to
Wow.
capitalize on a Netflix show.
Yeah, he's
So
greedy. He's like a,
yeah, so I mean, everyone is a human being. Everyone has good and bad points, but
mhm.
I feel like the show makes you have more sympathy for Lionel than perhaps he deserves,
Oh
and that's
yeah, they did for
about
sure.
that.
Like I
Mhm.
felt bad for him, and I felt like he had a more close relationship than they. Well, from what you're saying, it seemed like they were a little closer than that, but
Mhm.
it's surprising to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the really great thing that I recommend folks watch. There's the last interview that Jeff gave before he was killed in prison was for Stone Phillips, I think MSNBC. I think it's on and off of YouTube. Like it'll be up there for a while, then it'll get taken down, then it'll be back. But it's worth watching because they interview not only Jeff, but they interview Lionel, they interview Joyce, his mother, and
Oh.
interview Jeff and Lionel together as well. And
I
like,
think I've seen like a small clip of that, but I didn't get to
mhm,
see the whole thing when I was looking through interviews.
yeah. So I highly recommend watching that, like to really get a sense of like the dynamic of Jeff at that time and between his mother and father, too.
So,
It's a
so
really,
did
really
Dahmer grow any closer with his mother? Like after all this happened, did they like have a relationship? Do you know?
we don't it's not really known. She really had her own life at that point. She'd remarried, and like she wanted to distance herself from everything that was happening, because my god, who wouldn't? It's like, oh,
Hmm.
you're the mother of this monster. you know um but they did write letters to one another, and like she was very upset by his death, and said to a reporter, after Dahmer was killed, like, there, are you happy now? Like, now that he's dead? So, but yeah, not so much close with his mother. I don't think they really ever truly reconnected. But Jeff and Lionel did become closer towards the end of Jeff's life.
Um, so is there any other fact fact things? Maybe I should pull up. Hold on, I'm gonna pull up your Facebook real quick. I won't share it. I'm just gonna read from it and see if there's anything worth noting. So Josh fact checks the actual the Netflix show and goes through each episode and fact checks the whole thing, and that's how I found him.
Yeah.
I was reading your fact checks, and I was like, oh, and then I seen that you made a play about it, and I was like, I gotta check this out. And then I found your play cover on Wikipedia.
hmm Yeah,
Um,
and I started doing that, like, just because I'm, like I said at the beginning of this with the writing of the play, like I think it's important to tell the truth, as much
mhm.
as close as we can, because we're not just talking about Jeff Dahmer. Like, this is also about the 17 people who are no longer here, and I think it's important to respect and honor their memory. And uh, the thing about the Netflix show is that family members of the victims have since come out, and they're not happy about this show, because Ryan Murphy and his production team never asked their permission, for them and their family members to be depicted,
That
never
would bother me
consulted with
too.
them, asked them any questions. So that's something I think is important to know, too. But by and large, the Netflix show I have been mostly impressed by. Like, it does make some stuff up, or conflate things for dramatic effect. But I really appreciate how the show really is centering the experience of the victims and their families, and really, not focusing on like the horror and the gore, but really exploring the issues that this case brings up,
Yeah.
the issues of systemic racism and police brutality, and homophobia, and how in a lot of ways we haven't come very far, and we've
Oh yeah.
got work to do. But I think if you're going to tell this story at all, like, you need to tell it from that from that point of view. Because to make just another movie like just inside his head, like why? What purpose does that serve? It's been done. Like if you're going to tell this story, do it in a way that's going to try and help people to try and make a world so that something like this, someone like him, doesn't happen again. You know.
Yeah, I think Evan Peters did a great job, and I love him in American Horror Story, so I really liked him in this. Is there any stuff you can tell us about his neighbor? I seen that you said Niecy Nash does a great job portraying the neighbor. God.
Yeah, she's great. So Niecy Nash plays a woman named Glenda Cleveland, and in the Netflix show, Glenda Cleveland is depicted as being Dahmer's next door neighbor. In reality, Glenda Cleveland lived in the building next door to the apartment building that Jeff lived in.
Oh, so she didn't even live in the same apartment building?
No, she didn't. But Glenda Cleveland was one of the 3 people who found Connor Xanthophone naked in the street, and like, you know, was trying to and called the police repeatedly and followed up with the police repeatedly, and they didn't listen to her. So Glenda Cleveland, as depicted on the Netflix show, is a combination of Glenda and a close neighbor of Dahmer's who was in the building, named Pamela Bass. And they do mention Pamela Bass's name in one of the episodes, which I appreciate. So a lot of the things that happened to Glenda in the show actually happened to Pamela Bass, like the sandwich thing, for instance. It's not as dramatic, like it's inspired by a real incident, wasn't as dramatic in life as it was on the show, because in the show, like, it's this very tense confrontation where he's like, eat the sandwich. She's like, I don't know what's in that. He's like, eat the sandwich. In reality, Dahmer did often give sandwiches to his neighbors, including Pamela Bass, and they ate them. And it wasn't and it was only after he was caught when Pamela Bass was like, oh my God, what might I have been eating?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, can you imagine that? Like being his neighbor who he brought a sandwich. Ooh.
Yeah. And there's a documentary called, I've mentioned it before, called The Jeffrey Dahmer Files. I think it's on Tubi for free. But it interviews Pamela Bass very extensively. So that's worth checking out, because then you get to hear her side of the story, her experience from her own mouth, which I think is super valuable. But Niecy Nash is amazing in the Netflix show. Love her. It's really great work, important work.
Yeah, I thought she played a good part. I had no idea she wasn't his actual neighbor, though.
Yeah, and it makes sense, you know, and it's one of those things that, like, that's one of the instances when I'm like, I see why you did that. Like, it makes more, like, dramatic sense to have it be one person, you know.
Than like a few people within the apartment. Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
I did like Molly Ringwald as
Sherry
Dahmer too.
I agree. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love Molly Ringwald, so I think she did a good job. I'm just looking through. He hailed a taxi. Oh, I didn't know that. The Steve Toomey's body in a suitcase. He hailed a taxi to bring him back.
To bring him back to his grandmother's house, yes.
And
yeah, and what the tax, and of course, you know, as often happens when you are getting a taxi and you have a suitcase, the taxi driver's like, "Oh, I'll put that in the trunk for you." Mm-hmm. And the taxi driver noticed how heavy this suitcase was, considering it contained the body of a human being, and joked and was like, "Oh man, what, you got a dead body in here?" And Jeff said, "Yeah, I do." And the cab driver laughed. Thing.
Thought it was funny, and there was really a dead body in there. He really said, "Yeah, I do." Like,
like that's again one of those things that, like, doesn't seem so ridiculous that it can't be true, but it is. There are a lot of things like that with this particular series of events.
Shots of the Xanthophone family reacting to his verdict are heartbreaking to watch.
Oh, yeah, so I'll say more about that. So in the show, they have they show the hearing where Jeff is sentenced for the assault of the minor, And in the show, they have the synthesome family there, and like you see the reaction shots, and there's an incident where like the child's father is trying to testify, and the judge is like, can I have someone who can speak English here? And I really like all of that because, again, it really centers, this is the synthesome family's, pain. But as in a lot of these cases, with the show, the reality is worse, because in reality, the synthesome family was not at that sentencing. They were not even told that it was happening. They only found out later. So they were not.
He was the one who had his younger brother. That was the one where his younger brother was fondled by him. Oh, that has to be what a heart. Ugh, that's horrible. Somebody asked how accurate episode 6 is.
That's a great question. And I really like episode 6 because, again, it really centers Tony Hughes. Like, Dahmer's really the supporting character in that episode, which I think is right. But again, because the production did not actually reach out and speak to the victims' families and their friends, it's one of those things where it's a gray area. We don't know for sure. Like we were talking about earlier, like some people say that Dahmer and Tony Hughes had known each other for 6 months or so. Some people say he just met him that night. But I love how that episode, even if it may not be accurate to what the truth is, because we really can't know what the truth is, because it's not here. But I really love how it centered him, and it gave him a life. Like most of that episode, it's Tony Hughes like hanging out with his friends and talking and joking and like talking about about how this, again, during this time period, it's like there's a scene where Tony, like, not only are you black, you're gay, and you're deaf. Like, you've got all these things stacked against you. And I really appreciate the show in that episode for taking the time to really tell that story, because
I love that. Was so like, they did such a good job on that, and I really liked how they showed like the victim, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of the victims get lost in it because you're like, oh, just all the craziness about Dahmer, that I felt like they did the victims justice by showing a victim's story and everything they had to deal with and stuff like that. It just, he seems so sweet in the series. I agree, Jen. I really loved how they portrayed that whole.
Yeah, and I think important context for this, and again, if you want to do some watching, I know it's been mentioned in the chat, but on YouTube there you can watch documentary The Trial of Jeffrey Dahmer, which has extended clips from his trial. But what's really, really valuable to watch in that, one thing you can see, Tracy Edwards' statement in the court, which the man who got away and was responsible for getting Dahmer caught. That's important. But also in the trial, you see the victim impact statements, where families of the victims had the opportunity to tell Dahmer, to like, this is what you took from me. This is the person. And the mother, I believe it's the mother of Tony Hughes. Her tribute to her son is absolutely beautiful. One thing about how the trial is depicted in the Netflix show that I want to point out, that bugs me. So in the Netflix show, Dahmer has his glasses on in the trial the whole time, but in reality, Dahmer didn't wear his glasses during the trial.
Yeah, I watched him in the trial, and he didn't have them on, I think, like the whole time that I seen. I didn't see him have them on.
Yeah, because he didn't want to be able to see the faces of the families clearly. Because he was a coward. He only put on his glasses to read his final statement to the judge, which weirdly enough, the Netflix show only showed like the first sentence of that. Again, in that trial documentary, you can hear pretty much the full thing of it. But I think that's a very important piece of him, because in that statement, he's saying things like, I'm so sorry. Like, if I could give my life back to bring your loved ones back, I would do it. All these things. But but the way he speaks, it's completely flat. It's just like,
Yeah.
I am so very sorry that I did all this. Like, there's nothing there. And that was very, so and that's very typical of how he spoke and his affect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was the thing that she said, the I love you thing that they did, where she was like, was
Mm-hmm.
that really said in the impact statements, and she
Yeah, and she
spoke about?
signs it.
Yeah,
Yes, yes,
that
she
was
does.
cute.
Yeah.
That had
Mm-hmm.
me all like in my feels when she did that. And you said that Glenda and Jesse Jackson really did meet each other
They
in
did.
real life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they did a good job portraying that too, with like Jesse Jackson getting involved in all the like the
Mm-hmm.
racism part and the negligence. Like they did a real good job highlighting that, and like you said, not just making about Dahmer and the victims, but really about the issues that were in the whole with the whole situation with the police and everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And well, that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions for Josh before I let him go? I've been keeping him here for like 2 hours almost.
That's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad that you came and you know so much about this. Like way more than, I mean, I looked up as much as I could, but you just have so many facts that I didn't know about that I was so excited to hear. Ellie and the judge, were they really so, law enforcement and the judge, were they really so uncaring? They were asking.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. The law enforcement, again, because like again, like these were black and brown people who were going missing. Oh, who care? Oh, they didn't care. And then to add on to that, that it's like a same sex relationship and you have to remember, like, this is the 80s and the early 90s, so this is at the height of
Of
the
the
AIDS
AIDS epidemic.
crisis and the panic around that too, so that is also an important element and context to this story. Yeah, they really didn't care. And like the judge with the molestation trial, what did was really like, oh, you're a nice young man, you've got a bright future ahead of you, so I'm not gonna put you in jail, put you on probation instead,
That's
you
crazy.
know yeah, yeah.
And Pam's asking if Dahmer ever had a psych exam, which he did when he got caught
Mm-hmm.
with, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, Conrac's younger brother. Was that the case where they did the psych exam on him, where he got his dad
Uh-huh.
got a
Yeah.
lawyer?
And of course there were many more after he was imprisoned. And
Oh,
one of
so a
the
lot more people came forward saying that he had besides the soldiers, was there any more like kids who came forward that said Dahmer had done anything to them?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I meant there were many. He had many more psych evaluations after
Oh
he
yeah. Oh yeah,
caught.
I'm sure. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
think that was a lady that I'm talking about that was on the stand. I think she did like a psych eval on him, or she
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was like a therapist or a woman who did a psych eval, but
Yeah.
she gave a lot of insight into like Jeffrey Dahmer's mind for me. Like she explained even
Mm-hmm.
how he felt when he was committing a lot of these acts. Like she really dived deep into like why and what he was feeling and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Jen Lu says, do you think the judge was that way because he was offered money to have his picture taken, as if he were victim blaming? Like, because the victims like accepted money to take pictures and stuff. Do you think that the judge was,
Mm.
victim blaming in a sense?
Yeah, I think that is a really great point to bring up. And I would say probably yes, because again, like with the context of this time, and like not only these like people of color, some possibly homosexual, but also like potentially sex workers as well, and going and like in the 80s and early 90s, like sex work was of course not as closer to acceptance as it is now nowadays. So yeah, like it's disgusting. There are actually articles from the period about James Dockstader, the third person Dahmer killed, who was the other 14-year-old. Like newspaper articles describe him as like a 14-year-old male prostitute. And I'm like, this is a 14-year-old child, like who was kicked out of his home and was homeless and trying to live and eat any way he could, So yeah, like just there's a lot of that in the attitude of the time towards
which is really sad, like that a 14-year-old kid would have to do something like that to, survive. It's very hard to get people to understand what it was like in the 80s and 90s, but you're doing an excellent job, Jen said.
Thank you very much.
So, Texas Bluebonnet, you asked Tracy Edwards, where is he now? In 2012, he was actually convicted by a Milwaukee County Circuit Court for his role in the death of a man who was thrown off a bridge to his death. He was sentenced to 1.5 years in jail and 2 years of extended supervision. And was it recently he was convicted of a murder again, or was it just that was it?
I'm not sure. Like Tracy Edwards kind of drops out of sight for long periods of time, which he deserves to be a private citizen and live his own life. I'm actually not certain what's going on with him at this moment, but I hope he's well. I do.
Well, I'm trying to see if they say anything about him, but I don't see. Besides that, he was convicted of, like the murder. I don't see anything that says. So it says, according to ABC News, Edwards initially accused of homicide Edwards went to have trouble with the law in 2012, according to Fox 6 Milwaukee. Edwards was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison for another crime. He pleaded guilty to aiding a felon in a plea agreement with prosecutors in Milwaukee County. Then Edwards and another man were accused of throwing a homeless man into the river off a downtown bridge during an argument. The man, Johnny Jordan, drowned, the newspaper reported. He was initially accused of homicide in that case, but according to ABC News, at the time of his arrest, Edwards was homeless and had been moving from shelter to shelter since at least 2002. In 2018, he was convicted of domestic violence battery in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Court records show after that point, Edwards fell off the public's radar. And yeah, they don't know where he is now.
And again, like yes, Tracy Edwards has been involved in crimes and such, but again, like he is also a victim of this too. Because because of living through what he lived through and barely surviving, and having all that media attention focused on him, like that's had a huge impact on his
I
life.
can't imagine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for coming, and you're always welcome back. And
Thank you so much.
if there's anything you want to come talk about, we'll always have you back. And I'm sure I'm going to be looking into more Dahmer stuff because it's piquing my interest now. So I'll probably be messaging you, asking questions if I have any questions about it.
Sure thing.
Or if I get any questions from my subs that need asking, I'll message you too. But thank you so much for coming. And guys, if you're into ghost stories, Josh has 2 books out. Haunted History of Philadelphia and Haunted History of Delaware, and he actually does a ghost tours in Philadelphia, so he knows all kinds of cool ghost stories. So if you want to check out his books, you can go on his website, joshhitchens.com, and you can get his books on Amazon too. Haunted History of Philadelphia and Haunted History of Delaware. And Thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone in the chat for all the wonderful questions.
Oh yeah, I had a great time. There's so much I learned that I didn't know. He said, "Thank you so much for coming. I can't wait to check out your books. Great shows. People love you."
Thank you all so much.
All right. Good night, Josh.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.